Greetings, gamers. I know it's been a while, several months in fact, but I am suffering from a supreme level of fatigue that has basically made this blog and several other projects fall on the back burner while I try and sort out getting enough energy to function as a normal human being. For some reason, I can't seem to get enough sleep no matter how much sleep I get. Plus, that alternates between bouts of long term insomnia where I sleep 3 or 4 hours and then can't sleep for hours and hours and hours. And that's somewhat part of the reason I haven't been doing this blog. I've also been busy outside my home trying to line up a few other things to change my life for the better, including seeking medical help for the energy issue. Now, that being said, this is a blog mostly about gaming and gaming stuff, not just about me, although I will mention me from time to time and things that are going on. It's basically an aside to the greater ideal of me as a gamer playing tabletop role playing games. And that's what I mean when I say role playing or say gamer, I mean tabletop games. Primarily role playing games. I've never been a big fan of board games, particularly board games which require a lot of temporal setup and lots of parts. That doesn't mean there aren't good ones out there or card games, but like for example, the card game Sentinels of the Multiverse is one of the most fun card games I have ever played. And my friends have given me expansions for it for Christmas gifts because I know I love that game so much. And it's a wonderful game. So, as an aside, while I'm not a big outside role playing gamer, there are a few board and card games I will play. Example, Sentinels of the Multiverse is one of them. Now, that being said, because of the low energy levels, I have not yet finished Hearts and Souls 2nd Edition. It is coming. I can literally see the finish line and almost brush it with my fingertips. But I can't quite, get my hand to grab it or push through it and stumble over exhausted on the other end. Um, Part of it is I just haven't been in the writing frame of mind. I tend to switch between a very artistic and drawing a lot on sketch pads and coloring artwork and other things, and a writing mindset. And when one is in prevalent, the other one is not for me. And it's a very weird to me creative process is that I do cycle through these. And then there are times when neither one seems to work, and all I want to do is absorb information and read games, read books, whatever, consume media, including TV shows, which is one reason why cable television and I don't get along, because I often will go months without wanting to watch anything and then suddenly want to binge watch, 6 hours of a TV show, the same TV show. But that's kind of how it's always been for me. Even before there was streaming media, I had this issue, but it has been aggravated now that I can actually do that and not have to pay much attention to cable scheduling, which is fortunate for me because I don't really care to pay that much attention to somebody else's plans when it comes down to them planning for something I want to entertain myself with. I'd rather plan for myself or plan with my friends or, the people who are directly involved. Um, Now, that has led me to reading some old games that I had obtained when I was going through the last cycle of just consuming material. And since I've been tired, I consume more than I actually produce. And I was reading some games that I hadn't had the option to play or run. And I'm going to talk about those in the future. There's a couple different ones that I have taken a look at and just never mentioned, like Stars Without Number, that I think is awesome. Corporea, which I think is awesome. And a few others that just I put on my shelf because I wasn't doing anything with them at the time, and now I'm considering doing something with them because of it being a cyclical thing. Excuse me, I do have to drink a lot these days because I suffer from dry mouth as a side effect of medication, and I can't always hold off on these videos and not take a sip of something. Now, that being said, I have done a great amount of work, even though I haven't exactly been having the energy or feeling like it, doing research and poking at two games I've been working on. One of them is my space opera wushu game, and I've got a name for it. I'm beginning to hammer out the mechanics. I need some target number help which most likely will come from actually making characters and then playtesting the game, because it uses a version of a system that I've already written, modified significantly to fit the tone and scale of space opera wushu. Um, so it's using different dice, it's using different die pools, different ranks and traits, but otherwise it's very similar to the basic system of High Valor, which I wrote previously. I mean, it's going to be a die pool. You roll a number of dice, you take the highest, you add a trait, uh, two traits, and beat a target number, and that's going to be basically it. But all of your in-fiction setbacks, etc., are created by failing the die rolls. All of your in-fiction successes are done by succeeding at the die rolls, and it's a relatively simple system that can be adopted for a lot of different ways by changing what the dice pools are and how they're meant to be used. Now, with Wushu, it's a significant change because there are going to be fewer pools, larger die values, um, and that means I have to tinker with the numbers at the other end as well. But mostly because of a couple of cultural things that are feel appropriate to the genre of Wushu that wouldn't feel appropriate to another game, and I'm trying to uh, make those work. For example, the number 4 is unlucky in Chinese folklore and mythology, and because of that, I don't want to have traits that their basic number is +4. So I'm having to avoid that, because in High Valor it was +2, +4, +6, +8. Um, and in this, I'm trying to avoid the +4 in there because of the bad luck. Now, I may end up having to keep it and just go with it because you're still adding 2 traits, so there's usually never going to be exactly a +4. But it can happen, and so it's just a little psychological nudge that I want to kind of add to the game. It's not necessary, but I have to play with it and see. In addition to that, I've been working on my other space opera game, which is based more on space opera pulp, sort of the early magazine days of sci-fi and space opera, where you had the bubble helmeted heroes, with the ray guns in their fists, exploring the unknown with science and a square jaw. And that one I've been working on the system quite a bit. It was originally going to be called Derelict Delvers, and focus a bit on being an old school rules, a game similar to original Dungeons and Dragons or basic Dungeons and Dragons, but in sci-fi. But as I mentioned in previous videos and stuff, and talking about it online, there are 2 very excellent games that pretty much already do science fiction through that kind of lens. One of them is Stars Without Number. The other one is Hulks and Horrors, and both are fairly fun, interesting games that do that. And they did it better than I think I could, because while I like old school games quite a bit and have enjoyed playing them, when I sit down to write them, I start asking myself questions about how does this rule play out in terms of the fiction of the setting, in terms of the results we want for the characters in the setting. And not all old school rules seem to have been thought out that way. Now, I'm not saying that Hulks and Horrors and in Stars Without Number were not thought that way. They seem to have done a very good job of doing that in their own way. But my brain is somewhere neither old school rules guru nor indie story games guy. I'm just kind of in the middle. I enjoy all of it. Uh, well, I tend to lean more traditional than the big indie story games, but whatever. There are some of those I like, so I play whatever I like, and that's what I do, and I try and discuss that stuff and talk about it here, and give you ideas for running your own games or talking about your own games. But due to the change, Derelict Delvers as a name didn't quite fit. A lot of the reasons the change really came about is I went and did research, and when I say research, I mean I read a lot of old space opera from pulp magazines, from reprints of old pulps, stories from authors who were writing during that era and publishing books, from everything from the 20s to the late 50s is typical for my reading, but I included stuff that go all the way up to modern interpretations of space opera. And one thing I noticed was that there is a certain kind of feel that I'm trying to go for in the game, and the game system is supposed to pay out the dividends of, in terms of how the fiction feels once you've done rolling your dice and putting yourself in your character's role and saying what he says and or she says and etc. And so I have basically currently renamed the game either Archive Space or Agents of Archive Space, because in my head the archive is a foundation that is set up to basically uh, give power to these independent explorer teams who go out and investigate ancient ruins, new technologies found on new planets, explore new worlds, deal with threats to civilization, which the archive pretty much supports, etc. And so it's also kind of punny to me because, archive space. So it kind of makes sense from a point of view from both the science fiction I've read, the space opera I've read, and to my little tiny weird sense of humor. So it's either going to be Archive Space or Agents of Archive Space, and it's going to be significantly different than originally envisioned as an old school rules game. Instead, it's going to be very much one of my games that has my flavor. And while it will have some similarities to some things I've already written, it will not be using the same systems that I have already used. Again, there will always be similarities, and I've noticed this with other game authors, is that there tend to be um, I can tend to recognize one game author from another in terms of when they put something out, unless they're working entirely freelance. Because sometimes freelancers are told, write this, and they do so. Now, that's where I am. I'm trying to get my energy levels up, trying to finish uh, my game, Hearts and Souls, and try and get Agents of Archive Space to live up to the cover art I've got, which is gorgeous. I mean, really, artist Jeremy McHugh did a fantastic piece of art for me, and I look at that art and I want to be inspired to write a game that's up to the quality of the artwork I got for the cover, and it blew away anything I was writing previously. And I know I can write up to that level, but getting there has been some level of effort for me. I also think that part of my blockage with Hearts and Souls boils down to Kickstarter jitters, because I've never done Kickstarter before. I am planning on doing Kickstarter to pay for art and editing, as well as maybe get some adventures written by people other than me, because I'm really not a great adventure writer. I mean, I'm a great adventure runner in terms of I can sit down, create an adventure, and run it for my friends, but I work best when I know all the parties involved. When I know the players, I know mostly how they're going to act and react with their characters. Even if they make completely new characters that surprise me, I have a general idea of how they're going to, run that kind of character. If one decides to play out of character, super brilliant character, or one plays a out of character, strong, tough guy, when they usually don't play those things, I still have a somewhat of a read, because I've played with them for years, on where they're going to go with those kinds of concepts and roles. And, I'm great at reading that and using that to create adventures. But I'm not so good at writing an adventure that anyone can sit down and use. And I mean, I can do it, but it feels like I'm missing something important when I don't know who's going to be utilizing the adventure. But I know people who are good at writing adventures regardless of that uh, issue, so I'm going to try and get some of them recruited into writing adventures for Hearts and Souls for the Kickstarter. Maybe even settings. I haven't talked a lot about the Kickstarter that I want to do. I want to produce 3 settings for Hearts and Souls, for from me, and maybe some from other people. Hearts and Souls second edition settings will be the core one, which is called Analog Prime, or AMP, not to be confused with the AMP role-playing game, for the record. I've talked to Eloy, he's a great guy. We've kind of worked that out because of our similarities in names. But it basically stands for the original company name. AMP was the fictional comics company that produced the comics that I'm, putting in the backdrop for the world to have existed. Sort of my fictional, I made this up because I can, kind of comic books company that provide the characters and stories that we're drawing from to create the lore for my superhero game setting. Now, I don't want to include a core setting in the core rules because I have always felt that game designers out there, that is, people who sit down and play games and play superhero games, are game designers, and that they will design their own world more often than they will use mine as a game producer, creator, designer. Or they'll use some mashup of settings they've already gotten and enjoyed, which is fine, which includes the big two, you know who I'm talking about, right? Uh, and it's one of those things that I'm very cautious about. I do want to make a setting though, because I've got some ideas in here that I feel need their own framework around and lots of characters to put in there. But I don't want to step on the toes of the other creators out there, the other players, the other users of my game system. So producing it as a supplement as part of the Kickstarter or later for other people to pick up if they decide they want it makes more sense to me at this time. And that is basically a standard A&P or Analog Prime is a standard 4-color anything goes comic book setting. It's got a timeline that will go in the core book that you can draw upon to use, name drop and, create your own versions of those characters if you feel necessary. If you don't want to buy my eventual setting book or don't kickstart it, whichever. The other setting is one called the Inheritor Universe. And originally I was going to call it Progenitorverse, but there is already a superhero setting for another game system that's called Progenitor. And since I didn't want to step on their toes either, and I did talk to one of the creators about it, and we were like, but I came up with the term Inheritor and for this universe. In the Inheritor Universe, basically all people who are born with superpowers or develop superpowers in their teenage years develop them because they are descendants of one super powered being who nobody knows where he came from. It ties into the Tunguska event. In fact, that's when he originally appeared, was during the Tunguska event in Tunguska area. And he had superpowers. He was basically that world's version of the original superhero. Flies, super strong, really, your typical square-jawed, generic super guy. And that generic super guy, however, had a flaw. Maybe. Depends on how you look. For some people, it's a flaw. For other people, it was a good thing. Some people consider it a kind of subtle invasion. But he liked women. And because he liked women, he liked women a lot, he slept with them. And the end result is that at the start of the setting as a playable time period, the game core canon time period where here you go, here's the setting, play with it. It's been around a little over 100 years since that has happened. And, because I'm writing it so that you're going to be running from whatever year, 2015, 2016, that I actually get the fundamental product out for you to read. You're going to be running from that time period on with its history. But all people with superpowers that are internal to them are descendants in some way of this man. It could be first generation. They could be, great-great-grandchildren of this man. The governments of the world, some of them got together and considered this an invasion. And they established something they called the Filium Criteria, or Nephilim, I don't know how that's pronounced, so don't quote me on that. But it's based on the idea of the Watchers in the Bible that went unto the daughters of men and begat forth them the races of heroes and giants, at least in some interpretations of Genesis. But basically the idea is alien, what they consider alien DNA mixing with human DNA and producing these children that have powers beyond everybody else. And since he did spread his seed far and wide, I want to be delicate as I can with this way I'm approaching this subject. He ended up with a lot of descendants, over 100,000, and 100,000 descendants with superpowers. It's a fairly significant chunk of people. Not as many as some comic book companies produce, but a lot when you think about how much impact even one person with a large number of super abilities. And now they don't all inherit his exact abilities. In fact, combining with normal human DNA, means that they're kind of erratic and they can be all over the board like normal powers. But anybody who develops powers uh, internally is all produced from that man's descendants. There are going to be another option, is there are some, because of his appearance, and because of the government's worry and every other things, the history of the individual Nikolai Tesla plays out a little differently in that universe than in ours. He continues working, he establishes a company, and he develops technology to basically create, put normal humankind on parallel uh, progression with these superhuman beings, and creates an organization that eventually call themselves the Knights of Saint Tesla, which are dedicated to being good guys, but using technology and furthering human innovation instead of blessings of birth. Uh, and that's one of the things I want in that setting. It's a common origin, but not exactly a single origin setting. Now, I'm continuing to work on that one, and it's a little more real world because real world history will have changed somewhat. I don't want to play too much with certain aspects of history because sometimes I think that if you put superhumans into an equation in a fictional timeline to affect history, if you plug them in one point, they may make a change. But if you plug them in 2 points, they may counter out each other out. And I'm thinking that that is kind of how things are going to flow. There will be changes, yes, but those are places where there were not superhumans on both sides to kind of counter each other and ultimately create a sort of null in the change of the status quo. But that's another setting. And then the final setting I wanted to put in the Kickstarter is going to be the Midas City setting, which originally Midas City was the city I used for many, many years as a superhero setting that I tied to a fictional history of this gold miner that everybody nicknamed Midas because everything turned to gold that he seemed to, do after having years and years of horrible bad luck. But instead of using that as a modern city and basically putting my NPCs, etc., I'm going to set it back during the time shortly after the city was founded where there's still a gold rush going on. It's a Wild West frontier gold town, basically, where superpowers show up. Now, none of these settings have ties to the others other than being created by me in my head. Um, but that's kind of where I'm at. Midas City is going to be basically a mix of Western and superheroes, and those superheroes are going to be created by uh, a snake oil salesman who actually was a doctor who actually discovered cures that worked by traveling the world literally, the way the old snake oilsman used to say, I found this in darkest Africa or in the secret, gurus of India or whatever. But this guy actually did go and do those things and created a cure-all. Well, the problem is the cure-all has a side effect of anybody he actually cured with has a small, very small potential, especially if they were younger when they got this cure-all, of developing superhuman abilities. And this is the Gold Rush town where a lot of them have tended to end up because he started and moved across the country and, money and wealth, etc., draw people there. And that's some are bad, some are good, whatever. But that's Midas City, and it's a Western frontier superhero setting that I'd like to do, and it's going to be more intimate and smaller than the other two because the others are big, great universe-moving type things, while this one is a single city and the little bits of the world around it and touches of things here and there. Now, Midas City may not be a common origin one, a single origin, because I may throw in, supernatural creatures as well as people who have derived from the Doctor's Quicker Elixir. But we'll see where that goes as I write it. But because those things have not been written, the rules have been written, and that's as far as I've gotten. And I've got lots of the settings hammered out, like chunks of it and descriptions of it, but I'm not yet ready to produce a full document to say, here you go, edit this, put art, let's publish it. And that most Kickstarters seem to do it kind of in the reverse way. They get all that done, and then basically say, Yeah, we'll finish this product, but here's the freebies. Take a look, tell you what it's think. I kind of want to do it the reverse. I want to give you the full rule set, the thing I'm asking for money for in the Kickstarter, and then taking time and developing the support products over time that are bonuses if you kickstart with me. And so I'm kind of, as you can see, I'm not used to this Kickstarter thing. I'm kind of trepidatious about it. Um, but that's where I am. And you've got about 20 minutes or almost 30 minutes of me babbling here. So I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching. And I hope you will help me kickstart my games because it seems to be the way it's going now. And I'm a poor single writer here. It seems like all these other Kickstarters are produced by, 8 to 10 people, and here I am, one guy who's writing it all by himself and looking for individuals to maybe, hey, dude, will you write this if I can get you money for it? So it's a little bit harder for me, it seems, than for other people, but I'm going to do it my best and see what we can do. So thank you for listening and take care. God bless.